Hey y'all, how's it going? Well, I hope. At time of filming this video, it is the middle of August, and you know what that means? It means all of the new hire ALTs are arriving to Japan. I wanted to make a video to talk about what I think is probably one of the most important parts of the job itself, and that is learning how to lesson plan as an ALT. Also, just so you know, I know this is a lapel mic. I like holding it, all right? It's quite a whirlwind when you first arrive. I've talked a little bit about that in one of my other videos. Um, you know, you have orientation and then you have traveling to your new city and meeting everyone and setting up bank accounts and just like the whole process of getting here, just moving in. And that's really like all in your first week. But summer vacation lasts the entire month of August. So when you get here, after you get all of the preliminary stuff done, you essentially have an entire month where there's no class. And hopefully, you can use that time to lesson plan and just prep in general for class when it starts in September. And I know there's this excitement obviously about moving to a new country, and especially Japan. If you've wanted to come to Japan your whole life, and now you're finally here, and a lot of it's very exciting, yes, but you have to remember you are here to do a job, and you have to settle into that idea pretty quickly because you don't want to start out a foot behind. You want to be ready for the job itself. Likely, if you are stepping into this position and you don't have any experience teaching, anything, let alone English, you've never worked in a classroom before, you didn't study education, this entire thing can feel very daunting at the beginning when it kind of settles in on you that, oh yeah, I'm here to do a job. So I hope that that is what this video today can maybe help with. I really wanted to make this video because I feel like after I first arrived, I, tried to look for ALTs on YouTube that were talking about lesson planning specifically. And at the time, I feel like I didn't really see a lot of people talking about that. So I think it's important to at least have some idea of what to expect. In this video, I wanted to sort of break down my process of lesson planning and just the kind of workflow of that, how it goes for me, like step by step. Before I do that, I thought I would give maybe a little bit more background of myself and what I had experience with before coming into this. I think I mentioned a little bit about my background in my very first video, but I did not major in any sort of education based major. I've never worked in an actual classroom. I do have experience working with students though. So before I got this job, I was actually working for my family's church. Part time, I was working with the students in the student band. I was sort of the band director for those guys. Yeah, I've worked with students in that capacity before, but yeah, just not anything in like a formal classroom setting. So this was my first time to do that. But like I said in my first video, I did major in English literature. So I had some confidence going into the role of ESL teaching. So there is that. I've also mentioned before about, the whole every situation is different slogan that Jet likes to use a lot. And that will definitely come into play when it comes to lesson planning for you as well. Because it will be different depending on what school that you're placed at. It's just going to have to be something that you feel out after you arrive to your school or schools and after you start talking with your JTEs. Because if you're coming into a school that already had an ALT before you, then they have a better idea, a sort of base of how they use English ALTs. They already have experience with ALTs, so they probably have a solid idea of what they want from you. There are some schools that may only use ALTs in the classroom to read something and that's about it. But other schools might want you to be much, much more involved in the kids' lessons. So, yeah, it just depends. You will have to sort of get to your school and talk to your teachers and see, what they're expecting of you. During your initial orientation, you're going to hear the terms T2 teaching and T1 teaching. So, this is in reference to your classroom rules during team teaching. So, team teaching with your JTE. If you are T2 during a class, that means that you are not the lead teacher. This generally means that you yourself have not planned the lesson or made the main class materials. T2 is truly acting as an assistant teacher. You are there as support for the JTE, basically helping out wherever the JTE might need you for that lesson. T1 teaching is the opposite. So in T1, you are the lead teacher for the class. So this means that you have prepared the lesson plan yourself and you've also made any classwork materials that the students need, as well as gathering any supplies that you need to use for whatever you've planned. So in this case, the JTE will act as T2. So they will act as the assistant teacher, meaning that they are there to assist you wherever you need them in class. And again, what T1 teaching and T2 teaching looks like is slightly different depending on the school. Here is what I normally do in each position. So I have two different schools that I work at. I'm a prefectural ALT. So if you're a prefectural ALT, then chances are extremely likely that you will be at more than one school. You will have a base school, which is the school you spend the most time at every week, and then you have a visit school. You might have two visit schools, and you visit on a weekly or monthly basis. So my main school that I work at, my base school, I'm there 4 days of the week, and at my visit school, I'm there every Tuesday. So at my main school, it fluctuates a little bit. Sometimes I'm T1, sometimes I'm T2, but at my visit school, I am always T1. I think an example of good T2 use for me is with one of my favorite classes this year. So I T2 teach the 3-1 class, which is an advanced English communication class at my main school, my base school. Their textbook is pretty advanced, and the textbook model uses like journalistic articles. Every unit, the students have to read and answer questions and have general discussions about various environmental and societal issues that the articles cover. This class uses a lot of pair work and there's a lot of writing assignments. So, to make the best use of my presence in the classroom, my JTE, she actually has me read through the articles for each unit and then write up 4 or 5 academic questions about each article. Then I read the article in class, and then they practice their vocabulary for the unit. And then I ask each question and I let them discuss their answer in pairs before getting volunteers to answer. And of course, if I kind of notice that they're struggling to answer a certain question, I will, of course, give them some hints to what the answer might be or like hints to of how to find the answer. It's fun and it's engaging, and I think it's like the perfect example of T2 teaching, at least that I'm a part of. Okay, so as I said, at both of my schools, when I have a class that I T1 teach, it is all on me. And when I first started, I definitely asked a ton of questions. So, my advice when it comes to beginning T1 teaching would be if you are very concerned that you aren't doing it correctly, I would say ask questions, ask questions, ask questions. Let your teachers know that you need a little bit of help. They should be understanding that this is something brand new for you and you don't have any experience doing this. So it's totally okay to sort of let them know that, hey, I need a little bit more guidance as to what I'm doing here. With T1 teaching, the entire class is up to me. For me, I never use the textbook. I've never been asked to use the textbook. I can use elements from their textbook if I want to, but usually they just let me plan whatever I want to do from scratch. So if you are about to start work as an ALT, T1 might be either one of those things. All that being said, I'm going to move into a breakdown now of how I lesson plan for T1 teaching specifically. Okay, so first, the template. I actually have a lesson plan template, if you will, that I follow for every lesson plan that I create. And this is actually a sort of lesson plan template that my predecessor passed on to me. This is definitely a story for a different time, but I actually had a very unique circumstance when it came to my predecessor, so the ALT before me, in that she was actually still living in Ibaraki for the first few months after I arrived. So I was pretty lucky in that I was actually able to go and speak with her directly if I had any questions or concerns about anything at my school. And of course, I asked her about lesson planning, and her best advice I think that I got from her was this template. It's very simple actually. There's like three parts and that's it. It is opener, worksheet review or some kind of grammar review, and a game. So our classes are actually 50 minutes unless we're on a special schedule. What I generally do is I have class greetings and then I have an opener of sorts that lasts about 5 to 7 minutes. And then I have some sort of worksheet or pair work, some sort of activity that helps them review a particular grammar point. And that usually lasts from like 15 to 20 minutes. And then I have a game that hopefully incorporates the grammar that they've just been practicing into the rules of the game. And we do that for basically the rest of class time. So number 2 is inspiration. Since I lesson plan from scratch, I have to really think about what grammar slash vocabulary I even want to plan around. Here's what I did and still do. When I first started, I got my JTEs to loan me copies of the textbooks that they were using in class. And they were probably going to give them to me anyways without even asking because, like I said, I do T2 teach. Gosh, alliteration much? I T2 teach at my main school as well. So when I T2, I am kind of going off of the textbook because that's what we're using in class. But when it's just all on me, I read through the units of their textbooks and I kind of see what the most recent things that they've been studying are, especially vocabulary. I really like to see what kind of vocabulary that they've been covering, that they're familiar with. But as time went on, I realized that there was another source that was super helpful to me. Most of the time for ALTs, you will have other duties outside of the classroom, and often this includes marking papers. You'll never be marking the final grades for students or averaging everything together. You won't usually be doing that, but you will be asked to do initial markups. So, marking all grammar, spelling, and sentence structure mistakes of a student's coursework or test. And after spending enough time doing this, you'll kind of start to pick up on the areas where the students are making the most mistakes. And this often dictates what I end up planning lessons around so that I can give them more time to practice in these problem areas. So, just as an example, I ended up planning a lesson around common versus proper nouns. So, basically, when and when not to capitalize something in a sentence. So this was something that they were obviously already familiar with, but I noticed that they could definitely use more practice on because that was something that they were making mistakes. Using articles, so a and the, using articles correctly is another big thing that I often find myself correcting a lot. So I try to work with them on that. But these are just a few examples, of course. Also, you can definitely plan cultural lessons as well. These don't necessarily have to target a specific grammar point. It might incorporate many different things, but these are kind of more fun lessons because, once again, you are, yes, a native English speaker, but you're from a different country, and it's cool for the students to be able to hear about the place that you're from. Obviously, you're going to incorporate so much of that into your self introduction lesson, but you can plan other lessons, and sometimes JTEs might ask you to do that. So, if you want to talk about holidays from your home country, music, food, just like anything that the students would find really interesting, it can be a really fun way to learn English if you engage with them on like a different interesting topic. Man, when it's the fall semester, fall semester is my favorite time of the year because, of course, in America, we get Halloween in October, Thanksgiving in November, and Christmas in December. So the big three. It's just my favorite time of year. So I love that as a semester here specifically because I love to do holiday based lessons. Scary skeletons and shivers down your spine. Shrieking skulls will shock your soul, seal your doom tonight. Don't stress too much. It ultimately doesn't matter too much which grammar you are lesson planning around because at the end of the day, really any practice for them is good practice. Okay, so the next step for me is, I would say, material hunting. So after you decide what you're going to plan your lesson around, this is just all of the stuff that you're going to use in class, whether it's like some kind of worksheet, whether it is, a game and you need stuff to help them play the game, whatever it is that you need to conduct the lesson. The actual work that they'll complete in class. So for me, a lot of times that is either a worksheet that I have made or a worksheet that I have used from some other ESL source, or it's a PowerPoint that I've made. Yeah, sometimes I have lessons where I don't even give them a worksheet. It's just all like conducted through visual aid and like discussion and stuff. So that's usually what my lessons are like. I guess so. The question here would be, where do you find the ideas for making this part of the lesson? So, first, whichever prefecture that you get placed in, you should be included in some sort of online database that is shared by all of the ALTs in the prefecture. I know that I have access to one in Ibaraki for all Ibaraki ALTs. It can be a very helpful source, especially if you're first starting out, because this is a place where other ALTs can upload their own lesson plan guides, materials, just anything that they've made or used so that you can use each other's ideas in your own classes. That should be a source available to you. All right, so now, probably what you were expecting, online sources. When it comes to ESL teaching content, there's a lot of sources that are available, and you can spend a lot of time searching through all of these different sources. And there's a lot of good ones, but I'm going to give you the ones that I've gone back to the most. So the first is a site called Teachers Pay Teachers. Now, this is not a site specifically for ESL, but I've found it to be pretty useful myself. This is a site that my mother, who is a history teacher, has told me about. She's recommended. And basically, it's a site where teachers, it doesn't matter what subject that they teach, but any teacher can upload their own lesson plan materials for anybody else to use. Now, for this site, you do have to, well, actually, I think there's some stuff on here that's free, but a lot of the lesson plan material you do have to pay for. Like, it's usually not very expensive. And if you find something that you like and you pay the like $5 for it or whatever, it will come with the lesson plan guide, it will come with PDFs and like any material that this teacher has made to go with the lesson. So that's pretty great. I've also come across a site called teachthis.com. And this is a site I've returned to a lot. This is specifically an ESL teaching site. I like to go here specifically because they have a lot of great worksheets that you can download to use for yourself. And I also come here just to get inspiration if I'm making my own worksheet. So this site has both free to download material and exclusive material that you can only download if you are a member with them. But either way, this is, I think, a really great source, especially if this is, again, your first time really making lesson plan material, making worksheets. I also like to go on this site and you can search by grammar point, you can search by just a general topic, you can search by sort of everyday use English. And I like to go on here and just kind of see all the different kinds of worksheets that are available, and I kind of use them for inspiration sometimes just to make my own. I might see a worksheet that I really like the structure of or I like the concept of, and then I'll go and like sort of make my own version of it, something that maybe better fits what my class specifically needs. Sometimes I might, take a worksheet concept from this site and I might make it a little bit more difficult to fit, the second or third years that I work with rather than first years. Or I might do the opposite. I might take something that's a bit more advanced and make a simpler version of it that I can use with the first years, that sort of thing. I want to highlight one other source that you might not immediately think of, but I think it's great, honestly, and that is Pinterest. Don't underestimate the ideas for ESL teaching that you can find on here. I have found a lot of great ideas for various English learning games, as well as just general English teaching tips. I think no matter what the grammar point is that I'm trying to cover, I like to plan worksheet activities and like visual aid activities around pair work or teams specifically. I think this is by far the easiest way to get engagement with the students in your class. Really, the last thing I want is for them to be sitting there, singularly working in total silence for the whole class. Like I don't want that. English, it's a language that is, yes, you write it, you read it, but you also speak it. And I think that's kind of an area where they fall behind a lot of times is actually speaking. So I definitely don't want silence in my classroom. I want them to be talking and trying to answer questions and stuff. A lot of times my students are very quiet and they're very shy. They might not have confidence in English. Even the kids who are actually pretty good at English are also quiet a lot of the time. So if you allow them to work together on something, again, whether it's an activity or answering a question, it's much easier to get them to actually volunteer, just speak in general during class. Okay, so step 4 is like pretty obvious, pretty straightforward, so I won't spend too much time here, but it's, prep. So this is just the step where you got to make everything. So if you're not using some worksheet or something that's pre-made, obviously you have to make it yourself. And again, this is where, like I mentioned before, the online resources can be really useful, the places where you can see pre-made worksheets, because if you're really wanting to make your own, you can really study the layout of various kinds of worksheets. So like how everything is sectioned and aligned on a worksheet to use in class. So you can, when you make your own, you can make it look really nice and professional. Prep time, I would say you should also use in just gathering any extra materials you might need. So, if you're doing like a cultural lesson, so instead of doing some grammar review point, you might be doing some sort of activity where they're making something. So, you got to make sure you have enough, construction paper and scissors and glue sticks and stuff. Or, if you have a game that you're planning, but you need like extra materials like dice or balls or chalk or like whatever you need for your particular game. I'll admit, I'll go ahead and tell you, I do spend my own money on stuff to use. Not all the time, but sometimes. I would still double check with your school though, because there might be a situation where there's a department budget that you can use as an ALT. Could be a no, but could be a yes. You'll never know unless you ask. And then, of course, the last step here is going to be execution. In actually conducting class, I think it's important to remember that you are technically a teacher and they are students. If I'm using this to like give advice to you, because I know like your first classes, you're going to be really nervous. It's natural. If especially if you're not good at public speaking, it's kind of a scary unknown, getting into a classroom full of teenagers for the first time. Because FYI, if you work for JET specifically, you will most likely be placed at a high school or multiple high schools, occasionally a junior high, almost never elementary schools. Most JET ALTs are not working at elementary school. So you will more than likely be in classrooms with teenagers. But it's important to remember that you are the teacher, they are the students, and you have the authority in the classroom, okay? Sometimes it might not feel that way, especially if you don't speak Japanese fluently, and you might feel like you don't have a full like control, good hand on your class, but try to do your best to speak in a loud voice when you're in class. And of course, I always have a class greeting, either give like a good morning everyone, or just, hello everyone if it's in the afternoon, and I wait for their response. So I know I have their attention. This is a great way to establish that you have their attention by getting them to respond to you. And then after that, I move into the lesson. And one last thing I want to do in this video is just give a bit of an example of one of my own lessons. This is a lesson that I've given a bunch of times at this point. This is a lesson for first years specifically. I have a lot of first years at both schools. So, of course, with first years, whenever it's the beginning of a new school year, which is in April, every calendar school year begins in April in Japan. Whenever you have your first classes of first years, your first lesson is always going to be your self intro lesson. That's the first lesson that you will give just in general when you start your job as an ALT. You will give that lesson. You actually give it to all of the classes, not just first years. You will give it to the second years and the third years as well, because you're brand new, right? So they don't know you. So you're going to give it to everybody. But after that, if you stay multiple years working for JET, then every new school year with the new first years, you're going to give yourself intro lesson again. The example lesson I'm going to give you real quick is what I always use for my second lesson. Okay. So the next time, after I give myself intro lesson, the next time I have the first year classes on my schedule, this is the lesson I follow with. It's a kind of a continuation of the idea of self introductions. So the general idea is that, I introduced myself to them. Now it's their turn to sort of introduce themselves to each other and kind of get to know each other a little bit better. And the kids always really seem to enjoy it, so I thought I would kind of explain it here. So again, going off of my lesson plan template that I explained at the beginning, warm up or opener for 5 to 7 minutes. So this is how I will start this class, is by asking them a question of the day. And this is actually something I do with a lot of classes, not just this specific lesson plan. I actually use this for my opener in a lot of classes, mainly because I might not have every single class every week. Again, you can use the opener to review something that you talked about in the last class, but if there's a situation where you have a class and then you don't see them again for like 2 weeks, they might forget. So that's always up to you what you want to use your opener for. But yeah, I like to use questions of the day for my opener. Sometimes I'll have my first question just be something like, what's your favorite food? Something like very simple to start off with. I'll let the questions get progressively more advanced, I guess, as the year goes on. But for the first couple lessons with question of the day, they might be kind of simple. The way I do a question of the day is I have them make what I like to call a question chain. And this is because I want every student to answer the question and ask the question. So, for example, yeah, what's your favorite food? Very simple. And I'll write it on the board. And depending on their English level, I might write an example of how to answer the question. So if, I write the question like, what's your favorite food? I might, in the bottom say write my favorite food is, and be like, that's how you can answer the question. Again, some classes need that, others don't. So you can just fill it out. But, anyways, I write it on the board. I give them a second to sort of read it to themselves, kind of confirm that they know the meaning and they know what they're supposed to say and answer. And then I will go to the student that is in the front row all the way to my right. That's always where I start. And I go first and I ask that first student, okay, so what's your favorite food? And I'll have them give their answer. My favorite food is blah blah blah. And then what they do is they turn around to the next person, so the person sitting behind them. They ask that student, "What's your favorite food?" And so that student answers, and then they turn around. They go to the next person. So basically, they are all answering the question and then asking the question to the next person. And we do that for like the entire classroom. Again, it can take it usually takes like a solid like 7 or 8 minutes a lot of times to finish it, but I really like starting out my lessons this way because I think it's a good way to sort of break tension because I want them to start the class talking in a way. Actually, speaking English is what they get the most nervous about. So I think it's great to break that initial tension of like nobody wanting to be the first to say anything in class. So this way, everybody talks at the beginning of class. I get really good responses, like the kids respond really well to it. And then we move on to the middle portion of class, which is the sort of worksheet slash grammar review portion. But for this lesson, instead of jumping straight into studying some grammar point because likely this is the beginning of the school year for them, I like to do something a little bit more fun. And again, this is a way for them to get to kind of know each other a little bit better. So I give them an activity to do that I call like find someone who. That's usually what I call it. The worksheet has these different questions on it. So it's kind of like a question scavenger hunt in a way. And basically, they have all these questions that they will ask each other. So for this activity, I let them like stand up and walk around the room. An example question might be like, find someone who loves scary movies, right? And so the idea is that they need to find somebody who likes scary movies in class. But to find that out, they have to word that as a question. So do you love scary movies? And so they go around and they ask their classmates that question. And when they get a yes, they actually write that person's name in the space next to it. And the basic idea here is that I've given them like an allotted time, usually about 10 minutes. They're trying to write as many people's names as they possibly can in 10 minutes. I also tell them that they can ask their classmates, but they can also ask me or the JTE. By the end of it, I assess the room, see how many names everyone wrote, see who wrote the most names, and then as a quick review, I will ask all of the questions on the worksheet again. And basically, after I ask the question, anybody who said yes to the question like raises their hand so like everyone can see. My favorite part about it is, yeah, everyone's speaking, everybody's using English right away. And I think it's great because it's very engaging for all of them. And after this, I move on to the game. And basically, we do this for the rest of class time. Now, this isn't a game that practices any particular grammar point necessarily either. It's more of like a vocabulary game, but it's a really good go to game that I use whenever I have any like extra time left in class. So I basically just use this self intro themed lesson to teach it to the students since we will likely be playing it multiple times throughout the year. I can't take credit for this game. This is something else that my predecessor passed on to me. I don't know if she came up with this idea or if she heard about it somewhere. I'm not sure. She just told me that this is a game that she liked to play with the students, and they all really seem to like it, so I've just used it ever since. But it's essentially Hangman, but with a twist. And it's not as grim. So it's kind of a musical version of the game. You draw a flower with petals on the chalkboard, and then you draw the spaces for a mystery English word next to it. Now, unlike Hangman with like playing it like an American school, I never do whole sentences, just due to my students' English level. That might be a little bit difficult. So I'll just, come up with a word. And then I write a short hint about the word. Like I might put animal or place or food or something like that. And then I hand the first student to my right this little toy ball. And then I go on my Spotify on my phone and I will play a song, something upbeat and clean. And so when the music starts, the kids start passing the ball around the room. It's kind of like hot potato. And whenever I stop the music, the student that's holding the ball needs to guess a letter. So any letter. And just like regular hangman, if the letter is in the word, I will write it there. And if it's not in the word, I erase a flower petal. And of course, the goal is to guess the correct word before all of the flower petals are gone. And then, yeah, we play this until the bell rings. We usually only have time to do like two, maybe three words. This really is a favorite of the students. They respond really well to it. They especially love it when I pick a song that they know, like from TikTok or something. It's a lot of fun, and I definitely recommend giving it a try. And yeah, that's basically it. That's the entire lesson. And also, I did want to point out something that I use when I have lessons that are only made up of like visual aids or something. Sometimes I make Jeopardy games on PowerPoint or just use something that's like only a visual, so that way the students reviewing methods is for the lesson is only through listening and speaking. If I have a game or some like multiple choice question review or something and it's all in PowerPoint, I like to put them either in pairs or in like small groups, like groups of 4 or 5 students, usually groups, so that they can sort of work together to come up with their answer. This is something that I only started doing more recently, but I found that it works really well. And that is to give each group tiny whiteboards to use in their answers. So I actually bought these myself. I went to a Daiso, which is this 100 yen shop here in Japan, meaning it's a store that where like most of the stuff in the store is only 100 yen, so like $1. And I bought like 4 or 5 of these little whiteboards and a pack of markers. When I have a lesson using PowerPoints, like I mentioned, I will give each little group a whiteboard and I actually have them write their answers on this board. Sometimes, if it's like a game, I'll say that like whichever team writes the correct answer on their board first scores a point. To me, again, this just makes it easier to get the students to talk together and makes them more comfortable answering in front of class. And it's also just more engaging than just sitting there, again, writing on a piece of paper in silence. It just adds a little bit more of a fun element. All right, so that's about all I'll get into. I think I do want to mention that this will be a learning process for you as an ALT. You might plan a lesson and try it for the first time, and after class is over, you realize that it just doesn't work as well as you hoped. Maybe the instructions for an activity or game just ended up being too complicated, or the classwork or game just wasn't as engaging with the students as you were hoping it would be. Yeah, and another thing is timing. It's really easy to get the timing of class wrong. Like you might have a lesson where you spend way too much time on like the first part of the class and then you end up not having enough time for the rest of the lesson. I still do that to this day. But you just need to brush it off, honestly, because it's totally fine. You can always make adjustments to the lesson before you teach it again. For the most part, the work that you give them won't be graded and won't be like averaged into their GPA or anything. Getting them to practice their English skills with you, a native English speaker, that's the most important part. Okay, so I think I'm gonna wrap it up here. I hope this was helpful to you. If you've just been hired and you're about to start work, or even if you're just sort of aspiring to do this job in the future, as always, please feel free to drop any questions you have for me in the comments down below, and hopefully I can get to those. And thanks again to everyone who has watched so far and subscribed. I super appreciate it. And I will also quickly add, I do have an Instagram. I haven't plugged it that much. But if you want to follow me there, you totally can. I'm trying to post on there a lot more, so check it out if you want to. And yeah, see y'all next time. Bye.